All right. Have you heard of heart rate training? Are you curious as to how this can be beneficial to you as a runner? Have you ever heard of someone telling you to slow down your runs in order to get faster? Welcome to episode 135 on the Healthy Runner podcast, where we help you get stronger, run faster, and enjoy lifelong injury-free running. Today, I have with me the amazing Denny Krahe, who will give you a much better understanding of heart rate training and why slowing down can be so beneficial to you and your training. Thank you so much for accepting my invite, Denny.
Oh, appreciate you putting it out there, Duane. Looking forward to having some fun today and hopefully maybe helping people understand how you can run slow and still race fast and enjoy the process at the same time.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this. For those that have been hiding under a rock and is not familiar with Denny's work, he's got a pretty impressive body of work. He is a retired athletic trainer. He's a certified strength and conditioning specialist. He's a full-time running coach and podcaster on the Diz Runs Radio podcast. He wrote his first book in 2018, Be Ready on Race Day, and he's currently working on his second book, which is just amazing. But Denny, just like a lot of our belief system within the Healthy Runner podcast, he's a big believer in injury prevention. And he's also a big believer in heart rate training and specifically the MAF method. So we'll get into some of that today. And you can check out all of Denny's goodness, where he talks about running, life, and everything in between at dizruns.com and the Diz Runs podcast. So yeah, in this episode, we're going to really kind of chat about some of the common questions that we get all the time within our Healthy Runner community. What is heart rate training? What is the MAF, training, and how can it make you run faster? What is a good heart rate when training? How do you start? Utilizing heart rate training. How long does it take to train heart rate? And is heart rate training the best way to train? These are some of the common questions that we get all the time. Denny, on the show, we always like to start with a little dynamic warm up because we're all about movement here at Healthy Runner. So I shared your brief bio, but can you tell the listeners, where you call home or where you will be calling home very shortly, hopefully, fingers crossed, right?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. Sorry, go ahead, Duane.
Yeah, and a little bit more of your backstory on how you've gotten to this point in, both your running journey and your career itself.
Yeah, so currently, as of recording this, and those listening live in the Facebook group, I call Lakeland, Florida home. But in all according to plan, in the next 2 weeks, I'll be calling Evans, Georgia home. We are in that hanging on the edge of our seats with making sure everything goes through with the purchase of a new home, and just kind of lost the purchase of our current home. So having to deal with financing and blah, 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 blah. We're planning to move to Georgia soon, hopefully in a couple weeks, if not maybe a little bit longer if things kind of really fall apart. But eventually we'll call Georgia home. And, kind of like, I don't know if it's, I know it's not super common, but I, have similar conversations with folks on my podcast. Is like, how did you get started in running? And there's a certain percentage that were never runners. In fact, maybe would go so far as to say that they hated running, and I would be in that category. I thought running was ridiculous. It was something you did as part of another sport, as part of a quote unquote real sport. Maybe it was what you did in the off season to prepare for the actual sports season that you were participating in. And that was my relationship with running all the way up through high school. I can even remember, friends at the lunch table in high school being like, hey, I think we're going to go out for the track team. Are you going to come with us? And like literally laughing at them. Like, no, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. If I'm going to run to prepare for baseball season or hockey season or whatever, like I'll do it. But a sport where all you do is literally you show up to practice and you like, that's the worst part of every practice is the running. And so track where I'm just going to show up and then run the whole time. Like, no, like the non-starter, not going to do it. And then fast forward a handful of years, going through, like I ran a little bit in college just for kind of the keep the beer belly in check and things like that. Try to stay somewhat appealing to the ladies. But when I was in grad school, I was working with the track and cross country team primarily at Middle Tennessee State University, and I was the athletic trainer, so I had to be at practice the entire time, and we had a pretty loose schedule. And that practice kind of was technically from like 3 to 4:30, but like you could kind of show up as a runner anytime from like 2 to 6 and just do your workouts at the track. So I'd be at the track pretty much every day from 2 to 6 and sitting there and would just get so bored that by the end of practice, after a few months of that, it was like, all right, well, I'm just going to run a couple laps just to start killing some time. And I didn't particularly enjoy it, but it at least killed some time. So it was better than nothing. And that kind of started the slow build to, well, maybe running's okay. And then maybe I actually kind of like it a little bit. And then like, yeah, I really like running. And then you kind of started the podcast, started the blog, kind of doing some of those things. Obviously fast forward in a bit here to try to not make the long story any longer than it already is. But having a background in exercise science as an athletic trainer, and my grad school was in exercise science as well. A couple of people started asking if I coached runners, and I was like, nah, I don't, and then I was like, well, why not? And kind of, put the proverbial shingle outside the door and asked if anybody might be interested, and got a couple of folks that were interested. And it's just kind of started at a trickle and is now, I don't know, it's not a raging river, but it's a steady stream. And it's kind of become my full-time gig. And running went from something I hated to do to not only my job, but also something I enjoy. It's kind of all encompassing at this point, which is crazy. I would never thought that I'd be, we'd be sitting here having this conversation 10 years ago, let alone, 15, 20 years ago. I would have laughed at you if you'd have told me running would be my life. And yet here we are.
Yeah. And I think that's so common. I know my story is very similar to yours, because I would have never thought we'd be having this conversation as well. And I think that helps us, right? Like connect with a lot of, what I like to call the adult onset runner, right? There's so many who, either were athletes back in high school, back in college, and then, life starts and you get a real job, and then you buy a house and you get married and you have kids. And then it's like, you're not an athlete anymore, and things change. You go through like a different time period in your life. And, running is one of those things that we can do as we age, and to stay healthy, for our mind or, physical health. And so I'm sure that helps you connect, with number one, your listeners on the podcast, and then as well as, the clients that you work with through coaching. Yeah. And how long were you working as an athletic trainer prior to saying like, all right, I'm done with these, crazy hours of working evenings and weekends, covering games, and decided to go like all in on run coaching?
It was definitely like my primary gig for, I got certified in 2004, and left my last day job as an athletic trainer in 2012, I guess. But I maintained the certification. I do a little freelance stuff here and there. And only just recently, we just kind of decided I was done paying for the certification renewals and the CEUs and all that kind of stuff. Not that it was bad, but it's just, I like to think I kind of held it for a while as a just in case. And I feel like I'm at the point now where if something really goes sideways, and I need to get a quote unquote real job again, I couldn't see going back to that. Like you said, the hours are ridiculous. It's all kinds of travel and stuff. And it's just not at a point in my life where that is appealing anymore. So finally, the last recertification period, I was just like, you know what? Thanks. It's been a good ride. But we'll switch the classification to retired. And if things really go sideways, I can renew, and go jump through the hoops. But I like to think that, I'll maintain the knowledge. But yeah, my athletic training days hopefully are behind me now.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's great though, just having, you as an athletic trainer and a run coach, right? Working with people, because you have that knowledge of the common running related injuries, and you have a little bit more scientific knowledge of the body and training. So that is such a compliment, and is definitely, I'm sure, appreciated by the people that you work with. And before we get into heart rate training, I was just curious about the book a little bit. I mentioned, you wrote the book, Be Ready on Race Day. I'm just a little curious on, why you wrote the book, and if you can just give our listeners a little bit about, like what type of, running book is this, in case we were interested in reading it. I've been getting into reading myself personally to kind of wind down before bedtime and to get some better quality sleep. So yeah, I would love to learn a little bit more about, your book.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for asking. It's the idea behind the book is that it's basically the process that I go through as much as I can get into. Obviously, like I can backtrack. I'm very much a one size fits one type of person, especially as a coach. I don't really do the whole blanket program for everybody. Like everybody's got different goals, different schedules, different, they're starting from a different place, whatever. So I struggle with just throwing something out there for everybody. But I also recognize that hiring a coach to work with somebody, one off like that isn't necessarily in everybody's budget. I mean, it's not entirely cheap. I mean, I get it. And so for the idea behind the book was to kind of help thread the needle between those two, hiring a coach full-time versus just a generic plan, and really tried to outline the steps of here's what you need to do, or what I would encourage you to do, at least basically what I do, to put together a fairly comprehensive plan for your next race. And kind of looking at, kind of again, like the background stuff that I'll do with folks that hire me, where it's like, all right, what's your schedule? Like, I'd like to typically do my long runs on Saturday, but everybody doesn't necessarily like to do long runs on Saturday. So why would I just jump into the scheduling and be like, all right, you're going to do this run on this day and the long run on Saturday and blah, 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 blah. When maybe you work weekends, but you're off on Tuesday and Wednesday. So that's your quote unquote weekend. So like, just, some of those types of things where it's like, what's your schedule like? What's realistic? So often, I'll talk to people and they're like, yeah, I think I can run any day of the week. And it's like, well, but can you though? Like, are there days that you're a little bit busier, or that the kids have something, or that you have an obligation here or whatever? And like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, Tuesday's really kind of an awkward day to try to run. All right, well, then let's not run Tuesday. So the book is just all about A, looking at your schedule, but also B, like, then to take it from there, how do you progress and what happens when things go sideways? Because as anybody who's trained for a race before knows, or certainly anybody who's coached other runners, like, you can have the best laid plans and then life throws you a curveball and the sale of your house falls through, or something, you get sick, or whatever it might be that derails things. And like, so many runners, as I'm sure and the folks listening, maybe I'm hitting close to home here, I say it with love, y'all are so type A that like, as soon as one thing goes off the rails a little bit, it's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Well, take a breath. It's going to be figure outable. There's oftentimes the solution's pretty simple. And so as much as I could, obviously I can't go through every possible scenario that could possibly jump up, but it just kind of tried to go through step by step as far as different phases of the training cycle, of like, kind of kept with 16 weeks, but like, the first bit is a lot about building the base and then kind of getting some quality work and building the mileage up, and then, getting into the taper, things like that. And how to adjust when life happens, and like how I would move things around. So, maybe you have to miss a run. Well, that's probably not that big of a deal, especially if you got most of your runs in. So just try to really create a kind of step-by-step guide to either start from scratch and create your own plan, or to take a existing one size kind of fits all plan and really customize it. So now it's your plan as opposed to just a standard off the shelf, and it really fits your life. And again, so that you know how to adjust as you go, to hopefully make yourself ready to go on race day. And it's pretty short. It's a pretty easy read. Like it's kind of designed to be more of a guidebook instead of like a thick tome of information. But something that you can keep recycling back to as you need to, and hopefully feel like you're getting more than you would get if you just downloaded whatever plan is out there that is for the masses, but not really for any one individual.
Right. I love that. Yeah, it's definitely sounds like it's bridging the gap, right, between that person who just downloads, this free spreadsheet online versus, someone who is, working with yourself or doing personalized, one-on-one coaching. So yeah, that sounds like that would be a very valuable resource. And is it applicable to any race distance, whether you're training for a 5K or the marathon?
Yeah. I mean, it's I think the subtitle is for half marathons and marathons, but it really does scale up and down. Obviously, if you're training for the shorter distance or into the ultra distance territory, some of the longer runs or things like that, you may scale those accordingly. But I definitely think the foundational pillars are there no matter what distance you're training for.
Yeah. And, we didn't really get into much of your running background, but, is there a specific distance that you favor or that you like me? I kind of call myself an avid half marathoner, but I am currently training for my second marathon. Is there a distance that you are like, hey, this is my bread and butter, like this is my favorite distance to run?
Oh man, you're turning the tables on me, because that's the question I
always
ask
right.
everybody
That's right.
on my show. What's your favorite distance? And I have a very layered answer. Like if I had to pick one, like the marathon is probably my favorite distance. It's such a challenge. It's such a physical challenge, of course, but it's also a strategic challenge. It's a fueling challenge. It's a mental challenge towards the final miles of the marathon, and hoping that everything kind of comes together for you. I feel like the distance that I've figured out how to really race the best is probably the half. For whatever reason, for being a little bit shorter, for being like, only needing to focus for a couple hours instead of needing to really focus and dial it in for 4 hours or whatever. So maybe there's a little bit of that there as well. But I've been running more ultras lately. But I feel like those, for me, I don't really race them. Like those are just, be out in the woods for 6 or 7 or 10 hours and just kind of cruise around and stop at the aid stations and play with the dogs and chat to folks and whatever. So I don't know that I would say that. I mean, obviously the races, so that is what it is, but like, I don't treat them as much as races. I just treat them as, like I said, just kind of adventures and good long runs and spending a day out in the woods. So I mean, I like all three distance. I mean, I don't really like anything much shorter than I'll dip my toes in a 10K, but 5Ks are too short and too fast and too hard for me. I have no desire to just hammer it for 20 something minutes in a 5K. I'd rather just grind it for 8 hours out on a 50K. Which is ridiculous, but runner logic, it is what it is. But I guess, yeah, long-winded as per usual, kind of my style. But if I had to say my favorite distance, it would be the marathon. But there's some asterisks there for sure.
Yeah. How many marathons have you run?
Oh,
a bunch, huh?
That's a question.
Too many to count.
Yeah, I have a loose goal of running. Well, I got not really a loose goal. I have a goal of running all 50 states, a marathon in all 50 states, and I've got 10 states plus a DC off the map so far.
Sweet.
But I've run multiple races in Florida. I've run Disney several times and a couple other local marathons here because it's convenient. And sometimes you just get sick of not having a race on the calendar. I'm not a real far planning race guy. Like I kind of just run, and if something falls in my lap, I take advantage of it. And I've also done I don't even know how many at this point, 8 or 10, maybe something. I call S&G marathons. So it's and giggles type of marathons where it's just head out the door, and come back, don't come back until the watch ticks to 26.2. And so, I mean, they're obviously not official races, but they're definitely 26.2 miles. And I don't know how many times I've done that. I kind of lose track. A couple years ago, I want to do a marathon every month. So either a race or just a solo through town type of deal. So, yeah, I've covered the distance 20-ish times, 25 times, something like that. Probably a little more than half of them being official races.
Super impressive. I think it's helpful just kind of leading into today's topic, to have that little background, but I'm curious to see, do you remember if you happened to run Disney in the year 2020, like right before the pandemic happened? Were you there that year?
Yep.
You were?
Yep.
Yeah. Cause
I did the Goofy Challenge that year. So I did both the half and the full.
Dude, man, we could have actually been running beside each other at the half. So my wife and I did
the Donald Duck medal there behind you. And I said, yeah, I've got that one.
Yeah. My wife did her first half there. We had a great time. I was like, live streaming in like Magic Kingdom as I was running through. But I remember that next day, if you remember, the marathon was super humid. It was hot. I think they had to like cut the course down and at the end there. So yeah, that was kudos to you for doing the challenge. Holy cow. But man, I've never seen as many, like coming from like the, athletic training background that you have, like as many injured runners than I see at a Run Disney event. Holy cow. So many ice packs and so many. I'm like, what is going on here? Do these people just not train and just go out there and do it?
there's some of that. I have very mixed and strong opinions on Disney races. I'm a Disney fan. I enjoy lots of things about Disney. I have a lot of things I don't enjoy about Disney, which is a whole nother podcast for a whole nother day. But yeah, those Run Disney races are great for first timers. They're great for Disney fans. It's a massive cross section of runners that are there. But yeah, the towards the end of those races, it can be pretty rough out there for a lot of folks because of sometimes the heat, sometimes lack of training, sometimes a little bit of both that really come into play.
Yeah, I felt like I was at like a MASH unit, like at the end there. I'm like, what?
It's walking wounded at the end of those races for sure.
I know. Indeed. All right. Yeah. Thanks for giving me a little background on, some of your running and, Let's get into this topic of heart rate training. And we really haven't, I was telling you, we haven't really, we've alluded to this topic before. We've talked in kind of generalizations before, but we really never had, honestly, an expert like yourself who can share some like concrete examples and, how this type of training has either influenced your training on all the marathons that you've run or the clients that you work with. So what is heart rate training? Let's start there.
Yeah. So heart rate training, I guess, would kind of fall under the umbrella of like effort-based training, which is maybe there's just completely synonyms. I don't know, but like it's basically trying to train at a certain level of exertion from your body. So with heart rate training, you're using your heart rate and kind of having some different levels as far as like, this is quote unquote easy. This is kind of moderate. This is kind of hard. And having an intention for the runs that you're doing to try to work in those certain zones, and where people can get in trouble or where it can be frustrating sometimes is what feels like it might be easy to you and what your feedback from your heart rate might be telling you aren't always in as much of alignment as what you want them to be. So a lot of the pushback I get from folks or the complaints I get when I'm talking about heart rate training is like, well, gosh, I'd have to slow down so much. I'd mostly be walking to stay in this certain easy zone. And it's like, well, I mean, perhaps, and yes, that's frustrating. And I get it as a runner. Like I went through it as well. It's not a whole lot of fun, but it also maybe kind of tells you that maybe your aerobic system, which is where the easy kind of heart rate levels of training tend to be, is in that aerobic base building zone. Like maybe your aerobic fitness isn't quite where you think it is, because you've been training more anaerobically or kind of in that gray area between the two too much. And if you build up that base a little bit more and stay focused and disciplined to run easy most of the time, you might be amazed at how much more those harder workouts really pay off because you've got that firm foundation underneath you. So that's kind of I don't know if that completely answers the question, but that's kind of the general, theory is like you're training based, instead of paces, instead of speeds, things like that. It's kind of where your effort is, or in heart rate training, where your heart rate is, using that to guide the workout.
Okay. And I know I've seen different classification systems of like zones. Mm-hmm. Like, are there a specific number of zones of heart rate that you like to utilize, like 5 or 6 zones?
I like to keep it simple. I'm definitely one of those keep it simple, stupid type of people. But yes, there's different zones. Like most of the smartwatches or different apps, they'll have, like zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5. And typically like zone 2 and zone 1 would be classified as definitely easy. Zone 3, it kind of varies different, based on the different grading scales that they use. Sometimes like low zone 3 would still probably be easy, but you start getting higher zone 3, you start to get out of that easy zone. But for me, it's, I guess I'm a bit of a disciple of Phil Maffetone, who's kind of like the godfather of heart rate training. Started mostly with some marathoners, but a lot of triathletes kind of started, it's kind of where he got his, at least from the readings I've done, it really got some traction, 30 years ago or whatever. But he kind of, did the amalgamation of looking at a bunch of numbers and a bunch of formulas and basically said that like, a real easy way to do it is to start at 180 and then subtract your age. And that gives you kind of the upper limit of your aerobic heart rate zone. So I just turned 40 a couple months ago. So that makes the numbers real easy. 180 minus 40 means that I want to keep my heart rate below 140 to stay in the aerobic zone. Now, it's not necessarily hard and fast, and there's some alterations that you can use. And a lot of times, if you look at the more complicated formulas, it keeps you within 1 or 2 beats of that 180 minus your age anyway. So that's the formula I use. If I'm running easy, I'm below 140. And if I'm doing a workout, then I don't care. Like I'm going to be doing a workout and I'm going to be hammering it and my heart rate's going to be whatever it's going to be. And I don't even pay attention to it on those days. But the majority of my runs are easy. And so they're kind of that zone 1, zone 2, maybe sub zone 3. But for me, it's just below that MAF number that we talked, you kind of alluded a little bit, maximum aerobic function is that generally 180 minus your age. So for me, if I'm below 140, I'm in the zone I want to be at.
Okay. So that is what the MAF training method, because I've seen that term before, like, hey, I'm doing MAF. So it is using that calculation of doing 180 minus your age and making sure that the majority of your runs are in that easy zone.
Right. And that's where sometimes people get, I don't know, you can split hairs and you can be like a full on, like every run has to be below that number, which is, I'm probably closer to that end for myself, not necessarily as a coach, but like, I just tend to keep it in that range most of the time. Then you have, some that would be more of like an 80-20 type of training. So like 80%, I stay in that sub, that easy zone, and 20% of my time I'm doing harder workouts and pushing things along a little bit. And I don't really, like I said, I don't try to split hairs as long as you're intentional. Where I kind of come down a little bit harder on folks that are trying to really get into heart rate training is like, if you just let it drift and you're not like cutting yourself off at a certain point, and it's just like it was supposed to be an easy day, but now you're kind of not really hard, but not really easy. Like that's where you're not doing yourself as much good. So kind of, pick a side for today. But yeah, that's where the MAF comes from. It's a acronym, I guess, of maximum aerobic functioning, and but it's also like the first 3 letters of Maffetone's last name. So he's kind of there's some confusion there sometimes. It's just a happy coincidence, I guess, as far as naming goes.
Okay. All right. So that's our maximum aerobic functioning. And if someone were to start, right, or I guess, even before we go there, what are some indications, or like, when would you recommend to a runner, hey, like either they're not hitting their distances, they're not hitting the times that they would like to for running, or, when are the circumstances where you're like, or is it a runner who's like constantly getting injured, like where you'd be like, hey, have you ever considered doing heart rate training? Like, what are the indications of actually implementing heart rate training into someone's like training plan?
I'm biased. So take this with a grain of salt if you're so inclined. I've drunk the Kool-Aid. I'm hook, line, and sinker. Like this is for me. I never say never, but I can't see a reason that I would go away from the heart rate training philosophies. And all that to say, I can't think of a scenario or a type of runner who wouldn't benefit from, again, whether you're all in or whether you're dabbling in it a little bit. Of course, I think you'll get more benefit if you commit pretty strongly, but I can't think of anybody from, anybody running longer than maybe a half a mile is going to benefit from building a stronger aerobic base, because just physiologically, like you can't hammer aerobically for more than 8, 10, 12 seconds, something like that. So if your race is going to last longer than that, which, I mean, shoot, if I ran 100 meters, it was probably going to last longer than that. Having a strong aerobic system and being able to produce energy with aerobic efficiency is going to be helpful. So, but that said, to the question you asked, I mean, if you're dealing with injuries a lot, running easy takes, I mean, you still have stress on the body. There's still lots of load. There's still lots of ways that you can get injured, but the amount of stress is reduced versus when you're hammering. So if you slow down a little bit and you're running easy, you're putting less stress on the joints and less stress on the tissues that maybe need to be worked up and solidified. So your injury risk does go down. If you're struggling at the end of longer runs, a lot of times it's because you go out too fast and you start fading towards the end, which can still happen if you're keeping your heart rate in check, but it helps you pace a little bit better, helps you start off easier and hopefully have a little bit more gas left in the tank as well. So like I said, I mean, I'm biased, so take it for what it's worth, but I think that just about anybody listening to this outside of your world-class Olympic sprinters, which not for nothing, they do some easy running as well to build their aerobic system also, would benefit from at least learning more about heart rate training or effort-based training and seeing where that might fit into their routine.
Yeah, no, that definitely. And that's pretty consistent what we've, talked and shared on the podcast before, as far as, doing the majority of your runs easy, especially if you're a novice runner, and beginners just kind of building up, the tolerance to running and the demands that it does place on your body. So that makes sense to me. Yeah. So, what is a good heart rate when training? Is it just a matter of staying underneath that 180 minus your age and staying in that zone 1 and zone 2, essentially?
Yeah. I mean, that's again, keeping it as the most simple, like that's the way to do it. And one thing where people get tripped up is like, oh, well, my average heart rate was below whatever. And without trying to go too deep into the physiology, weeds here, once your body kind of shifts over from aerobic energy production, which is what we're trying to get into in these lower levels of effort, once it kind of shifts into anaerobic production, it's not like a car where it just downshifts when you slow back down again. It kind of stays in that range. And it's not like it's a 100% either way, but like, it's more focused anaerobically. So if you let your heart rate creep too high on a supposed to be easy day, you kind of stop building the aerobic fitness, broad brushes, but kind of stop building as much or get as much benefit aerobically as if you keep it underneath. So if you're going to really commit to it, or at least as you kind of start thinking about it, it's not what is my average heart rate for today's run? And sometimes it's above and sometimes it's below. It really is, at least ideally, you're trying to keep your heart rate below whatever your limit is. Again, whether it's zone 1, zone 2, whether it's 180 minus your age, kind of whatever you, or you do, a more detailed test, a lactate threshold type of test, whatever, wherever you kind of get that demarcation line, you want to stay under it for as close to 100% of an easy run as possible. Again, if we're doing a hard workout, we're not worried about the line anymore. But if the plan is to be an easy run, a recovery run, something like that, then you want to keep that level of effort or that heart rate below that line that you've established.
Okay. All right. Awesome. And, this is actually, we're at the time of this recording right now, for those listening on the podcast or watching on YouTube, we're doing this as a morning live. So I didn't expect there to be many people in the chat, but hey, we got some folks hopping on here on the chat. And, Christy brings up a good question that I'm sure you probably get a lot. And she's wondering, like, what's the best way to identify a baseline? She finds herself like lost in zones at times based on effort.
Based on like perceived effort, like RPE, is that what we're?
That's what I'm thinking. She means, okay. Yeah.
So that's where you start to or have the potential, at least, to start to blur the lines a little bit between subjective and objective, right? And kind of what I tried to mention earlier, maybe didn't get clearly across, is that sometimes what feels like it's easy and what your objective measurements from your body, from your heart rate, are telling you are easy, they don't always line up. So, again, depending on how much you really want to lean into the heart rate training or the effort-based training type of thing, that's kind of where yes, it feels easy, but if my heart, like for me personally, just to put some concrete numbers to it, I might feel like I'm cruising around at a pretty easy level of effort, but my heart rate's getting into 145, 146, 147. And we've already established that my line is supposed to be, quote unquote, supposed to be 140. Well, just because I'm feeling easy, clearly my body is working a little bit harder, assuming that my sensors are accurate and things like that, which I like to think that they are most of the time, as long as I've got the batteries charged and my heart rate strapped. So, if I start to see that happening, then I try to just maintain the discipline of like, all right, well, I need to slow down. Maybe I need to take a walk break and really back it down a little bit, because today's run is supposed to be in that aerobic zone. And there's so many factors that can cause things to go up. I mean, like you said, we're recording this in the morning. I used to be the runner that couldn't run without having a cup of coffee. Well, I quickly learned when I got hooked on this heart rate training thing, that if I have a cup of coffee or two before I head out for my run, well, guess what? The caffeine has an impact and I have to run a lot slower. I have to walk a lot more to keep my heart rate below the zone. So now some water before I head out the door in the morning and I get my coffee afterwards. If you're running later in the day, the heat can impact your heart rate. So you might still feel like you're easy, but the heat stress, especially in the summertime, brings that heart rate up to help cool your body. So, you might have to slow down a minute or two per mile to keep your heart rate in that easy zone. Even though it feels easy to run faster, physiologically, it's not. Digestion, illness, lack of sleep, like there's so many factors that, when you realize or you recognize the body as a whole ecosystem, anything that's affecting that ecosystem affects your heart rate. And if you're really locked in on heart rate training, you have to accept that there's going to be days where your pace is going to be a lot slower than you want it to be, just to make sure your heart rate is in that zone. So you're building the aerobic base and trusting in the big picture. It's gonna work out for you. So hopefully, Christy, right, was who asked that question. Hopefully, yeah. Christy, that helps clear it up for you a little bit.
Yeah, and she does. Thank you for answering her question. And Coach Kat on our team just loves your term "figure outable." And yeah, Coach Kat, you will absolutely love Denny's podcast because, yeah, he talks a lot like you do, and you're gonna love listening to his show. So yeah, she's gonna jive with your lingo.
There's a few isms that come out when I get fired up. So be careful.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So you sold me right now on, maybe doubling down on some heart rate training, and someone wants to start, like, what's the best way for them to start training for heart rate?
Again, I mean, I like to keep it simple. So it's 180 minus your age, but you can certainly use just the zones that you have on your watch already. It's going to get you in the ballpark enough that you kind of get a feel for it. But I think that the big thing that gets overlooked, and this wrinkles some or rubs some people the wrong way a little bit, ruffles some feathers sometimes. But if you're going to do heart rate training of whatever form or fashion, accuracy matters. And I mean, I've got my fancy Coros watch here, but the accuracy of the wrist-based heart rate monitors are questionable at best. Yours might be perfect, it might be spot on, but There's journal articles out there where they look at, studies of this type of stuff, and the variability of a wrist-based wrist sensor for heart rate. I've seen plus or minus 34 beats per minute, which is just not good enough. I mean, you could be cruising along thinking you're at 120 and you're at 158, or you could cruise around like, oh my gosh, how am I at 160? I feel like I just started. Well, you're really at 130, and so getting a heart rate strap where the error is like 2 to 3 beats at most gets you a lot closer to accuracy. So I know sometimes it's not. I know personally it's not always comfortable. It's not always something that you want to strap around. Ladies with the sports bra, sometimes it's even more so of a little bit of a discomfort issue. But if you're gonna commit to heart rate training, you got to get yourself a heart rate strap. It's just the margin of error is so much slimmer, and accuracy matters. A couple of beats per minute can really make a difference from staying in the easy zone and sliding out of it. And if your margin of error is 30, well, I mean, clearly you don't always know. And especially back to Christy's question, you might feel like you're running easy, but if you got this huge window of margin of error, you're like, oh yeah, I'm just cruising along, and physiologically your body's like, whoa, slow down, but you not getting that feedback. So that's a key place to start, is with, as much as I know sometimes we have so much technology, and sometimes running without technology is helpful and ideal. And if you're going to do heart rate training, you kind of got to, if you're really going to commit to it, you really have to get a heart rate strap.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And I know that's been a game changer for me once I, got my new Garmin and I invested in the chest strap. But Christy's actually wondering herself, is there a favorite like chest strap monitor, or is there ones that are better than others? Or are they pretty much just, get the brand that syncs to your watch that you have?
I mean, these days they're all pretty good. A decade ago, it was a little bit, I don't want to say sketchier, but you really had to be careful of which type would sync to what watch and things like that. And these days they're pretty much universal. The one thing I would suggest is to get a sensor. And I think, again, these days, I think they're pretty much universal across the board, but make sure it connects both to ANT+, and to Bluetooth. Because that way, most of the time the watches are the ANT+, the ANT, whatever that, I don't know what the acronym is, but that's the technology that usually syncs with the watches. But if you ever want to sync to your phone, Bluetooth. So if you have one that can go both ways, you won't find yourself what I did when I was like, oh, I'll dabble in it. And I got like the cheaper one that was only synced to my watch, and it was great. But then I was like, oh, I'm doing, workouts on my spin bike, and I want to use the Peloton app, and I want to have my heart rate there. Oh, I need another strap that will actually connect, or a sensor, the sensor piece, the transmitter piece that will actually connect to the app itself. So like I said, these days, I'm pretty sure that anything new, whether it's Garmin, whether it's Polar, I use a Wahoo, I think it's called, but they're all pretty good. The replacement straps that you might need every so often, usually the transmitters are all universal. They'll snap off and snap onto whatever new replacement strap if the sensors start to wear down after a couple of years. And those are like $10 to replace, $15 to replace. The initial sensor is like 70, 75 because it's got the transmitter piece. But yeah, whatever one's on sale is probably going to be good. Just look for Bluetooth and ANT+ connection and you'll be all set.
Good tip. And yeah, Anne is actually wondering if the anti-chafe creams wind up affecting the readings. Have you heard anything about that in terms of like changing the reliability of the chest straps? Because yeah, during these hot, sweaty, humid runs, like you definitely need the anti-chafe creams where your strap is.
Yeah. I mean, I can't verify that, Anne, but I would imagine that you'll have no issues as long as you're not putting the stuff right over the couple of sensors that are kind of right in front. Like anything along the sides, you should be fine. And to lube up like crazy, as long as it stays stationary, right? Like you don't want to lube up so much that your strap is all sliding up and down. That would give you some funky readings as well. But if you're worried about like an arm swinging against it or just rubbing a little bit on your sides, a little bit of anti-chafe stuff along those sides shouldn't be an issue. The only sensors are right in front, kind of right in front of your rib cage. So keep that area clean and you'll be good.
Yeah, and actually, Cameron's adding that they actually have a brand of a sports bra that has the strap built in, and then you just have the transmitter portion, I guess, that you just add in there. So for you ladies,
2022. I mean, what will this world think of next? That's awesome.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So all right, so we talked about kind of starting, and actually, I'm sure this probably comes up a lot because even myself, this has been something that I've been kind of dedicating for my easy runs to really control my heart rate a little bit more. And in the beginning, it was really hard and I've struggled. So is there anything that you tell your clients besides, once it starts getting higher and it's not at that threshold point of staying aerobic, besides walking, is there any other strategies or things that we can do to help control heart rate? You did mention already, like not having too much caffeine before you go out for your easy runs. Any other tips?
Yeah, I mean, those are some of the big ones, like I said, or at least kind of like I've stumbled into. If you go out first thing in the morning before life has a chance to just throw wrenches at you, I mean, work stress and family stress and this and that and the other that can build up through the day. Like it's, for me, it's a lot easier to control my heart rate before coffee, before I open email, before I get into work mode, before any of that type of stuff happens. I know not everybody's a morning runner. I know I didn't used to be a morning runner. It's kind of happened because living in Florida, like 10 months of the year, you kind of have to be a morning runner if you're going to be out there for any extended period of time. But getting out early is a good place to start. I mentioned sleep in passing, but like that's such a huge piece of the puzzle. Like if you're getting good quality restorative sleep, it makes a difference. If your sleep quality is poor, or you're not getting enough sleep, like it just can jack up the whole system. And no matter what time of day you're trying to run, whether it's first thing in the day, midday, evening, whatever, you're going to have a harder time keeping the heart rate down. And one thing I think that also can help, and it's you kind of got to figure out the right paces or the right, you kind of trial and error this a little bit on your own. But if you can slow down a little bit more, if you know that you struggle to keep your heart rate down as the run progresses, you get to mile 2, 3, 4, whatever, try to slow down a little bit in those first couple of runs, because like once the heart rate gets up, and you kind of probably know this, Duane, like it'll come down, but it's hard to really keep it down once it really gets up, once the engine gets revving. So if you can, if you're struggling to keep it under 140, like just again to put numbers on it instead of making it hypothetical, you're struggling to keep it under 140 for the last part of your run, but the first phase you're kind of in that 135 and it holds steady for a while till you get to 140. Well, maybe try to back down that first mile or two to where your heart rate's quote unquote only in the 120s, and then so that way as it creeps up, you can kind of just keep cruising, keep an eye on things, but it probably doesn't creep up beyond 140 by the time you finish that recovery type of run. Yes, that means you're a little bit slower at the beginning. Some people worry about what my heart rate's
probably a good thing for your body, right?
Probably, exactly. And some people, I've had people push back a little bit. Well, I'm going to get the most bang for my buck if I keep it right at 138 to 140. And like, maybe, but like, we're not talking about a massive difference. Like we're a fraction of a percent to not have to stress about, oh my gosh, my heart rate's 141. I need to slow it down, or I need to walk or whatever. Like just keep it nice and easy. And if it creeps up a little bit towards the end of the run, you've got enough buffer that you'll probably be okay.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think you bring up a good point about getting into workday, because I used to do that on the weekends for my long run, where I'd get up, I'd have my fuel, I'd have my oatmeal, my banana, right, and then like have my tea, digest a little, so then I start working for like an hour and a half. It's hard to pull away from the computer, and now I'm like anxious when I go out there because now it's getting freaking late, it's getting hot outside. So, and I used to notice like my heart rate would like spike right away. I would always, get flat at the end of those long runs. So I think you bring up a good point about not getting into, the stressors of a work day. If you're really looking to control that heart rate with the easy runs, because I've seen a difference with that. And yeah, even just going out, I think we all do it. And I think the more experience you get as a runner, it's a little easier to control this, but especially for you beginner runners out there, we all tend to go out too fast. And, we do it on race day and we do it in our training runs as well. And it's just so much easier to really make that conscious effort, like Denny's talking about, of really keeping it super easy for that first mile. And like I mentioned before, for most of us in our 40s, in our 50s, our tendons actually like that, to go slower, because our blood flow is not as good to those tendons. And it is really good to allow a really good warm up. Like, for example, this morning, I actually just did a really hard track workout. And now I started doing 2 miles, easy pace. And it's amazing how much different I feel. And my body's actually ready to like hit those intervals hard, versus like last year when I was only doing like a mile warm up. It's, unfortunately, hey, once we get over 40, it's like, we do need that extra time to really get that blood flow in, warm the tissue. So, not only is it good for heart rate training wise, but it's also good for your body to like stay healthy, especially for those of you who have been struggling with, constant, aches and pains or niggles here and there. This can be very effective. And, I'm kind of curious about the length of time, right? Like if someone is saying, okay, I'm going to be like a firm heart rate training and I'm going to look at my number. Is there a recommended duration that someone should train before they see results? I don't know. Like, do you know of any like efficacy studies or like research that's been done? Like, hey, you've trained with heart rate training for 6 months or 12 months, then, your easy pace, gets a little faster or your race times are improved. Have you seen anything out there like that?
Not really. I wish I could give a good firm answer. This is definitely heart rate training and where quite frankly, a lot of people, they try it for a few months, they try it for a training cycle and don't see much progress. And like, that's kind of the norm. It's going to be the exception to the rule that anybody sees a massive leap forward in their fitness in the first 4, 6, even probably 8 to 12 months. Like you'll see some progress. You'll hopefully feel better. Like that's kind of the first metric that you might see is just like, if you find yourself feeling kind of just destroyed after every run, maybe not destroyed, but just fatigued, tired, it's hard to kind of go through the rest of your day. And you really start to adopt some of the heart rate training stuff. You might notice that like, yes, I was slower, but like I was able to play with the kids or do the yard work or do kind of all the other things, go through day feeling good. And so that kind of can be that first glimmer. But as far as like actual tangible pace improvements, things like that, like I said, I mean, you can see some glimmers of progress early, but it really is like a year plus to start to really feel like the needle is moving, which is tough because, it's hard to stay patient that long. It's hard to really like continue to trust the process when you feel like the numbers aren't moving and things aren't really, like, why do I keep doing this? And this is a dangerous thing to say to runners. So heed this with a word of warning, but it's also something that kind of like the more you do it, especially in the early stages, the more beneficial, the quicker the benefits come. But, caveat, if your normal routine is to run 3 days a week, don't just jump into running 7 days a week with heart rate training, thinking that it's going to make things like that's too much for your body, even running easy. So like, over the course of months and years, maybe you add an extra day or you add more mileage, keeping it easy, that's going to help speed the process along as well. So there's a lot of moving parts or maybe slowly moving parts, variables to consider. But if you're just going to jump, like I'm going to commit to it for the next training cycle, like I wish I could tell you that you could expect massive PRs in 12 to 16 weeks. But you're probably not. But again, if you stick with it long enough, not to make it all about me, but I guess I'm the guest, so I can make it somewhat about me, right? Like some of my PRs, my more recent marathon PRs, just because of how schedules worked out, were actually like the second marathon in a week. So like I would do like one marathon on Saturday and then the next week do another marathon on Saturday or Sunday, kind of saved myself in the first one because I knew I had another race coming up, and then just went for broke on the second one. And like, not only did I beat my time from the week before, but I like PR'd.
Wow.
Just because the base was so strong and the recovery after, 26 miles the week before, but like I wasn't pushing very hard. I don't know that I stayed quite perfectly in my aerobic zones that day, but I wasn't maxing out. So recovery came quicker. And then I was able to just drop the hammer the next week and PR. And that's happened multiple times. Lots of variables again involved, but like, that's another kind of one of those things that in the first year wouldn't have seen that type of change. But after 2 years, 3 years, 4 years of consistently doing it, that's kind of some of the payoff that you can start to see the longer you stick with it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It makes sense. And I think for, those beginner runners, again, if you're really looking to do this right and start that solid foundation and base training, focusing on heart rate training makes sense to me. I guess my question to you is like for that, person who's coming back for thirds, fourth marathon, they're looking to PR, and let's say heart rate, spikes aren't an issue in their training. is that when you start to implement more of like an 80-20 rule and start to add in some of the speed work into their training?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Once you've kind of got that good base established, I mean, of course, you still want the base to be at least in my view, you still want the base work, the aerobic work to be the majority of what you're doing. But absolutely, if you've been running for a while, you've been healthy, you've been avoiding the injuries, you've been seeing some progress. Let's throw down, and then you can look at whatever type, whether it's short intervals, longer intervals, tempo runs. I mean, all the world is your oyster at that point. And again, when you're doing those hard workouts, you don't worry about your heart rate anymore. Like it's just whatever the effort base is or whatever the pace goals are, like you're doing your best to hit it and your heart rate's going to be high, and that's okay. Like we're physiologically, again, assuming good health and all those types of things, which if in this scenario would be the case, like your body can handle it. You'll be all right. It'll recover. And you might even find that hitting some of those hard workouts, those key workouts, you might even be able to exceed expectations because you're typically going into it with a full tank because your easy runs have actually been easy. So like, your body's prepped and primed and ready to go. And when you just throw down, like, you're like, well, damn, where did that come from? Well, it came from this aerobic base, this focus on running easy. And then when it's time to go hard, it's like riding a bike. Like your body doesn't forget. The number of times I've had people go, I thought I was getting slower, but man, this race, like, holy cow, or this workout, like, where did that come from? Well, it came from the easy miles. It's just doesn't make sense when you stop and think that I can run easy, run slower, and actually not only maintain pace, but actually get faster that way. Like, but the science is there without going too deep in the rabbit hole. And for whatever my N=1 is worth, like I'll testify to it as well.
Yeah, man. Yeah. That is by far the most common thing that we have to coach our clients on. And I know Coach Lou likes to do this with his clients is, the speed work, he'll just make it harder. So it forces them to go easier that next day for the easier run. Or, they get frustrated because they're not hitting the paces that they should be hitting. And it's because they went too fast for their easy run the day before. So, there's different ways that we get into this, but I think, myself reflecting back as, in the start of my running journey, I definitely was running my easy runs too fast. I definitely was running my long runs too fast. And now I'm really
100%.
starting to see the benefit, like you mentioned, of like I mentioned, I did track workout this morning, like nailed my paces. And it was like, but I'm so much more conscious and aware that yesterday's easy run, I was keeping it easy, and it was ridiculous dew point here in Connecticut. I felt like I was in Florida. It was like 92-degree dew point, and it was running through thick air, and I had to slow down to keep that heart rate in check. And like tomorrow's easy run, I know I'm gonna make sure it's super easy so my body can recover and I can maintain my heart rate where it needs to be. So, you stay healthy in the training. So again, for those, like, that's why, Denny does this. That's why I do it. It's like, hey, let's just teach you all the things that we learned the hard way in our training. And so you guys can be like fast tracked, right? And you don't have to make the mistakes that we made. No, this is great. And, I don't know. I think those were really all the questions I had with heart rate training. Is there anything else that I kind of missed or, that you would like to share?
I mean, I think we covered most of it. Again, I mean, just to reemphasize, get a heart rate strap if you're serious about it, and keep the long view in mind. Like it's a patience. It's patience is required with heart rate training. But as endurance athletes, whatever type of endurance, distance you run, like, running is kind of a patience required sport anyway. Even though we always want to speed things up, we want the hacks, we want the quickest way to get there. Sometimes I heard a quote one time that that don't take shortcuts because they take too long, and I feel like that's the case with building up. You can take the shortcuts and try to do all the hard workouts, but it's kind of a not if but when you're going to break down, and then you lose all this progress. You keep it steady build with whether it's heart rate training, just running based on effort, whatever, but keeping your easy runs easy goes a long way to staying on track, and slow and steady, the tortoise and the hare, slow and steady wins the race. So, and obviously if you ever have any questions, I'm happy to pop into the group with any questions, tag me in the group or shoot me a message on social medias. I'm always happy to talk heart rate training. I can go till I'm blue in the face. So happy to answer any questions along the way.
Yeah. And then really, I appreciate that. And, we're in kind of the final stretch here, which is like the last question we ask all our guests. And, if you can change one thing about the misconception of heart rate training, what would that be?
It's, I mean, kind of just going back to a little bit of a theme here, but like, the fact that you can slow down and still get faster. There's so much of this no pain, no gain. If you're not just killing it every day, you're not making progress. And I mean, I don't know that really applies anywhere, but especially in terms of us as endurance athletes. If you're killing yourself every day, man, you're making it harder for yourself to make progress year after year. So, just having that perspective that you can slow down and it will help you get faster. And then not for nothing, at some point, and I'm not quite there yet, but at some point it starts to become really hard to get your heart rate up towards your whatever your line of demarcation is, because your aerobic system is getting so strong that you have to like run pretty hard to get even close to that line. And that's really where the magic happens, because then you can kind of be at race pace and it's still easy. And now Bob's your uncle, and who knows what you can do on race day. So just keep the faith, keep the long-term perspective in mind. And don't worry about all this no pain, no gain stuff and what your stats look like on Strava. Like, trust the process. It'll work for you.
I love it. And yeah, like I say, we need to train in order to run, and running is not your, it's not your boot camp class. It's not a hit class. Like, every time you go out there and run, you shouldn't be working at an 8 out of 10 effort and trying to, feel like you've released every endorphin possible because you worked out so hard. If you want to do it for longevity, as Denny mentioned, we need to be smart about how we train. And it is remarkable on how slowing down for the majority of your runs throughout the week can actually get you faster. And I always get comments, like, a lot of times, I'll post some of my, paces for like my easy runs, which for me is like basically low 10s. And then they see I can run a half marathon at an 8-minute pace or sub 8. And people comment like, hey, I see all your runs on Strava are like a 10 something. Like, I guess that actually works to like slow down so you can actually race fast. And yeah, it works, guys. It works. Denny's like not lying here. So yeah, no, this was super helpful. I'm sure there are going to be many runners who really, resonated honestly with your message and about running, and, want to learn a little bit more about your podcast and your entertaining emails. Like, I'm subscribed to your email list. I love your emails, by the way. They're just awesome. I read all of them. I'm like, oh, this is great. It's like, not only like how you can, and I want to get a little better at this, but like how you can relate any life situation to running is just amazing. I love it. I love it. So yeah, I read all your emails. Or if someone like wants to buy your book, where can our healthy runner community connect with you?
Well, like you mentioned at the beginning, dizruns.com is kind of the main headquarters. I'm pretty much at Diz Runs on all things social. Twitter is probably my favorite, although I'm on Instagram, of course, as well. And Facebook, you can find me there if you just search for Diz Runs, or search for my name if you want to connect to me personally. The book is available on Amazon and Kindle. So you get a hard copy or a digital copy, whatever floats your boat. And of course, if you, whatever podcast app, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm not there. I used to be kind of dabbled with it. It just became too much of a headache. But any podcast app, just search for Diz Runs and you find the show. And there's only, I don't know, whatever we're at, 1,000 something episodes to catch up on. Not that you need to go all the way back, but if you do, I'll give you, I don't know, I'll give you something. We'll find a prize for going all the way back to episode 1. Although the first couple hundred, little rough, if I may say so. So maybe start at 400 or 500 and work your way back from there. But Diz Runs Radio comes out every Monday and Friday. So, tune in on listen to Duane, listen to me, listen to everybody else. Lots of good podcasts out there of various methods. But yeah, I'm pretty easy to find if you just search for Diz Runs. That's I'll pop up just about wherever.
Awesome. And yeah, we'll definitely put all those links in our show notes as always. And yeah, I say the same thing, Denny. It's like when someone's like, oh yeah, I just found your podcast and I'm going back and like watching everyone from the beginning, and I like cringe. I'm like, maybe like skip the first 20, 30 episodes when I was like still learning like how to do this thing. But yeah, you have a full body of work of episodes. I'm not going to lie. Once I found out about you and, started following your show and listening to it during my runs, I was a little overwhelmed. I'm like, man, do I need to like go back and listen to all of these? So yeah, I would recommend for those that are getting in some of Danny's world and, pick the topics, the titles that sound good to you. I like the format, how you switch things up and having guests versus quick takes that you call or Q&As. Yeah, I think you guys will, if you're loving the Healthy Runner podcast, podcast, and you'll definitely love Denny's show as well. So yeah, thanks again. This was fun. And you guys who start following Denny's show, you will see myself on his show coming out in by the time this is released on the podcast, it will already be out there. So you can check out our episode that we chatted about on Denny's show. And yeah, I appreciate you coming on, Denny. This has been fun as always. Thanks again.
Oh, well, I appreciate it, Duane. And I'm sure one way or the other, hopefully we'll be able to do this again at some point. But thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Once you get settled in Georgia there and you get some time back and you're all moved in, then yeah, we'll definitely have to do this again. And thank you to all the listeners who, checked us out, whether you were, listening on the Spark Healthy Runner YouTube channel, on the podcast, or within our Healthy Runner Facebook community. Let's always maintain a strong mind, a strong body, and just keep running. Until next time.